And that's what accidents can do. Look what COVID did. COVID isolated people. Kids couldn't go to school, couldn't play with other boys and girls. You can't go to work. You have to stay in your home. COVID had a catastrophic effect simply because of the isolation. There are also relational violations. Sexual, verbal, physical, betrayal of trust, rejection, divorce, marital violations. These are all in the category of how much one person can hurt and injure another person psychologically, physically sometimes, and certainly emotionally. And some of you sitting here tonight are reeling from relational violations, and this has affected your character and your personality. You don't trust people. When you've been traumatized relationally, you can't look people in the eye. You're uncomfortable when you get close to people. And many people that have been violated relationally will build a wall, and they'll never let people get close to them. It's always at arm's length, always at a distance. There are traumas that happen. Thirdly, trauma is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. There are three types of trauma. There is what is known as acute trauma, chronic trauma, or complex trauma. Acute trauma is a single event that occurs. You're violated at a particular day, at a particular time. You're mugged, you're beat up, you get in a catastrophic car accident where somebody dies or a family member is lost. It's called acute trauma. It's one event that happens, but it has a debilitating impact on you for life. The memory, nightmares, insecurity and uncertainty and fear. There is chronic trauma. This is when a traumatic experience is repeated over and over again, like domestic violence or sexual violence. Each one is its own traumatic experience, but they are repeated over and over and over again. And then there is complex trauma. Complex trauma is various kinds of traumas that happen that are unrelated to each other. Someone may get in an accident where somebody dies, and that's a traumatic event. They're diagnosed with cancer. That's another unrelated event that happens in their life. And that's what is known as complex trauma. And these occur in people's lives. And then fourthly, there are the demonically inspired assaults that come against people's lives. Many times the Bible says that Jesus prayed with people that had a tormented mind. It's also mentioned in the book of Acts when people had a tormented mind and they knew that they could go to Jesus and get relief and get help. The devil wants to torment your mind with thoughts and imaginations that are unhealthy and that are destructive. For example, depression. I suffered for years from a spirit of depression that was born of my upbringing. A mentally ill mother and an alcoholic father. My two oldest brothers both committed suicide because in our early years damage was done that we couldn't cope with. We didn't have the emotional maturity to handle what was going on around us, and it did damage. And it wasn't until I gave my life to Christ that I discovered healing from that kind of assault that had come against my mind. So let's talk about what this woman did, because this is quite incredible. As I said, deep wounds, some of the ones that you're carrying, cause long-term suffering. Okay. This woman comes to a place of desperation. She's willing to violate the social norm. Not supposed to touch anyone, and she wants to touch Jesus. She's not supposed to be in public. She's unclean, and yet she's willing to go out.
Come on.
And suffer the humiliation and the embarrassment of people running away from her. She has no peace. She's lonely. She can't enjoy life. She's vexed and frustrated. She's suffering. And the ongoing kind of pain from all that doesn't ever lift. Two things happen that result in her miracle. Number one, she heard about Jesus. That's what it says. How? Someone told her somehow, some way. We don't know how. We don't know the circumstance. Maybe somebody was going door to door. I don't know. Maybe somebody that was dropping off food on her porch began to engage her in a conversation through the window or the door, who had just been to a healing crusade, who had just seen Jesus heal. And she thought about this woman. But somewhere, somehow, someone told her about Jesus. That's how critical your witness is. Maybe tomorrow when you're outreaching for the crusade that we're going to have tomorrow night, maybe you'll run into this woman. Maybe you can tell someone tomorrow who's in a wheelchair, has a walker or a cane, or you can see is oppressed and tormented, that there's a God in heaven who loves her. And if you'll come out to the park, you'll be prayed for, and you can experience a miracle. Somebody told her about Jesus, and those 4 words say a lot. She heard about Jesus, and it led to the action on her part that resulted in her healing. In the book of Luke chapter 7, now when Jesus concluded all his sayings in the hearing of the people, he entered Capernaum, and a certain centurion's servant who was dear to him was sick and ready to die. So when he heard about Jesus, he sent elders of the Jews to him. This is what God is depending on. He's depending on you causing people to hear about Jesus Christ. And sometimes that's all people need. That's all. This woman is so desperate at this point in her life. Someone tells her about Jesus, and the way that it was communicated was enough to trigger faith and hope for herself. I've got to find out where he is. I've got to go where he is. And I believe that if I touch the hem of his garment, I will be made whole. And so the second thing that happens is that hearing about Jesus triggered faith that resulted in her miracle. She believed, she came to believe, as a result of somebody telling her that Jesus could heal her. And there's a very simple premise going on here tonight that you need to embrace in verse 27. When she heard about Jesus, she then came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment, for she said, to who? She said to herself, if you're going to get healed tonight, if you're going to be relieved of the deep wounds of life, you got to talk to yourself tonight. If I can just get to the altar tonight and cry out to God, I believe I can be healed. This woman teaches us a great lesson. Everyone talks to themselves. Some people might say, well, I prayed before and I don't believe there's a miracle for me. Someone else might say, well, I'm going to depend on what the doctor tells me. Another might say to themselves, well, I'm not sure about all this Jesus. But this woman said, if I can touch the hem of his garment, I will be made whole. I like the way Matthew communicates this same story. It says in 9:21, Matthew, for she said